Boosting workplace diversity is a common goal for companies, but it's one that many of those same companies struggle with. The tech giants Facebook and Google, for instance, Black and Hispanic employees make up about 5% of all staff. Those companies and others have strategies for increasing diversity, and my next guest says artificial intelligence should be one of them. Jia Min is a head data scientist at a company called Ideal, which has developed an AI recruitment assistant. She's going to be speaking at a panel this evening on diversity in Canadian companies, but she's with me in studio now. Good morning.
Morning.
How can AI be used to boost diversity within a company?
So when we talk about AI in recruitment and hiring, specifically, some of the applications include resume screening. So that's the thing that I'm involved in. So it's this idea that instead of having humans manually read resumes and screen candidates, you are using technology or a type of artificial intelligence called machine learning to read that resume for you and the idea is that it's free of human biases, or that you can help mitigate or eliminate some of the bias. So we know from previous research that there is a lot of bias that goes into someone's name. So a name on a resume, if it's a non-white sounding name, there are certain biases or stereotypes that seem to get triggered, and those candidates are less likely to get a call for an interview. So the idea is that if you use artificial intelligence instead, which is a technology, you can program it to ignore things like someone's name, someone's race, someone's age. So the theory or the idea is that then you can help eliminate that bias and that first step.
The hope from a lot of companies, they may have done, training around unconscious bias, trying to recognize it, but also trying to weed it out, is that they could, reprogram themselves, reprogram the humans,
right,
so that they're not picking up on these. What is it that a machine can do, that a robot can do, that a human can't?
So I think there's a lot of good intention around that. I do think that's also a necessary part of the problem. We need to increase awareness, but I think you're basically asking humans to do an inhuman job, which is don't have these human instincts, don't have these automatic reactions, try to overcome them. So for me, that's why don't we, instead of trying to reprogram a human mind, which is sort of proving to be impossible so far, why don't we just use sort of an inhuman solution, which is technology? So it's this idea that you don't need to tell a machine, you don't need to tell artificial intelligence, don't have these biases, because they won't have those biases programmed in to begin with. So it's the idea that instead of relying on, maybe this faulty software of our human mind, let's rely on technology. And instead of, if the majority of people are behaving the same way in a situation, let's change the situation.
The name is one thing. What else is going on that you're trying to specifically eliminate?
So the name is a big part of it, and there's also other things. A lot of times it will be things like education. So where someone went to school, there's a thing called similarity bias or affinity bias. It's like, oh, you went to the same school that I did, so you're obviously a better candidate.
We're going to put you in this pile rather than that
right,
pile.
Exactly. So a lot of these things are not necessarily conscious. So this idea that you're not purposely trying to find people like who went to the same school as you, but when you find someone, you're like it triggers sort of this positive feeling for you. And then the other thing is a lot of these factors are also proxies for demographics. So if you go to a certain type of school, that's often correlated with things like, racial background or social economic status. So there are, the other thing would be graduation dates. So, especially in technology, there's this idea that there's a lot of ageism. So, the date you graduated, that triggers some other types of stereotypes.
You work in the tech sector. Through the work that you're doing now, we hear a lot about the concerns around the lack of diversity at some of the big companies. How big of an issue do you think it truly is?
It definitely is an issue in terms of if we want to achieve what we call equality, whatever your reference points are for that. We are, population-wise, we're not being represented in terms of the workplace, the demographics. So, and when companies do collect their data and track it, you can see that some companies have shown that their applicant pool is more diverse than their employee pool. So even though there are minority candidates who are applying to these companies, they're not actually getting hired. So now what we're trying to do is figure out why not. And if it is this idea that some of it is a human factor, let's sort of try to eliminate that human factor and try to improve upon it. I do think technology sort of gets an unfair perception because we're so visible and we're such a topic of interest.
It happens across the spectrum.
It happens across the spectrum. Yeah. So, and bias and discrimination and stereotypes happen across our society. So that's definitely gets played out in the workplace as well.
Is blind hiring enough to boost diversity?
So blind hiring. So interesting enough, artificial intelligence is in a way a type of blind hiring because you're basically using a machine that's sort of ignoring that information. It's definitely a part of the puzzle. I think, Google, like you said, Google and Facebook, they have this type of unconscious bias training. And so these are the companies with the biggest pockets in the world. They have access to the deepest resources, and it's still they can still barely struggle to increase their diversity. So we know it's a really, really complicated problem, and the best companies in the world are still struggling with it. So it's blind hiring is a part of the puzzle.
How do you make sure then that you're not programming the machine with your own bias?
Yes, that's a great question. So there definitely is a possibility of that happening. So because machine learning trades on historical decisions, the idea is that it can start replicating bias. That is a possibility. The biggest or the best solution is to be vigilant. So the idea is that people who are involved in this technology is they're very well aware of it. It's not the bias problem is not solved. So there's no resolved solution for it. Mm-hmm. So you have to audit your data. You have to monitor your outcomes, and if there is a bias that's being replicated, you can then take steps to help remove it. So
we'll see whether people pick up on this. Thank you for telling us about it.
All right. My pleasure.
Gia Min is head data scientist at HR tech company Ideal. She's part of a panel called Diversity by Design. It starts today.